Enfield's technical alpha test has ended, so I'm here to give you my first impression of the game. Before the test ended, I managed to reach the end game, beat the hardest game content, and min-maxed my base setup. Let me start by explaining what Enfield is about. Arknights Endfield is a real-time 3D RPG with strategic elements made by Hypergriff. You are the administrator of Enfield Industries. Rumor has it that the administrator shows up whenever a crisis hits the Enfield Industries or Talos 2. The story is very deep, and the gameplay itself is a huge split between base management and team-based combat with real-time strategy. I personally haven't played other base management games, but I heard that it is similar to a game called Factorio. As for the battle itself, it is quite similar to Final Fantasy XII. I personally haven't played Xenoblade, but I heard that Enfield also looks similar to that game. If you actually watched my streams for the technical alpha, you'd notice that I did not have the best first impression when it came to the base management. Due to the overwhelming amount of information, I thought that the whole thing was just tedious. Even most viewers expressed the same sentiment. However, as I learned more about the base management, it eventually got interesting. I started optimizing my base setup and was heavily rewarded for doing so. In fact, a very good base setup in Enfield solves the huge majority of your grinding problems. In a lot of games, it feels frustrating when you pull a new character just to have them in a long queue of characters to build. A lot of gacha games have this stressful long grind needed to max out a single character. This particular problem does not exist in Enfield. Your base will handle all the resources needed to build your new shiny character. To quickly elaborate on this, there's this building called Trading Station. The trading station acquires new trade requests from certain factions automatically. When you have a trade request, you need to provide certain products that fulfills the requests and rewards you with faction currency. Those products required can be made by your base, while the faction currency can be used in the faction shop. This faction shop sells you everything you need to build up your operators. With this, you can see how important it is to optimize your base setup. Of course, not everyone would have fun with setting up their bases even after knowing this. So if you're not interested in base management, there will most likely be guides in the future where you can simply copy base setups for an optimal production. I'm not gonna lie, I feel like the battle needs a lot more polish. Let's start with the things I like about the current battle system. Chaining attacks in the right order and using the right skill at the right time is rewarding. The game doesn't use a dodge system, so you'll need to be very attentive with enemy mechanics. And speaking of enemy mechanics, the boss mechanics of this game is quite legit, especially if we're talking about Chapter 4's final boss. Now let's talk about what I dislike about the current battle system. Clunkiness. The AI of your allies is actually so bad that you'd end up wondering what is the purpose of them participating in battle, when all they do is deal non-existent damage by spamming auto attacks. Not to mention, most of the time they just eat AoE damage from enemy attacks. The orb system is hard to utilize. As you fight enemies, there's this chance to produce elemental orbs. If you hit these elemental orbs with an AoE attack, it will cause a reaction. The type of reaction and AoE damage it inflicts will depend on the element and the strength of the skill you hit it with. The biggest problem is that these orbs are stationary. For example, if you use a skill with a knockback effect to trigger the orb, you might just end up pushing the enemy away from the orb's explosion. Another problem that could happen is, since your teammates are fighting randomly in the battlefield, it is particularly hard to lure enemies into the orbs. Speaking of luring enemies, it is also weird that the tank class itself doesn't have naturally high aggro. This means that they are tanky for no good reason. I do believe in Hypergriff, and I think that everything will drastically improve on the next beta. I might have praised how rewarding the base management of the game is, but it doesn't mean I cannot be critical about building characters and how they progress. Currently, it is very linear. There are only 3 customizable features when it comes to building an operator: their weapon, gears set effect, and weapon essences. When it comes to weapons, there isn't true freedom either. For example, some weapons have fixed element boost, some weapons only provide a boost on floating enemies, etc. This means that your weapon of choice for an operator is very limited. There's no RNG when it comes to producing gears, but at the same time, it is pretty bland because you can only choose between a few set effects. However, it is neat that you can pretty much grind for gears infinitely, as long as your base is producing the required materials. As for the weapon essences, these things are basically like a modification for weapons. They will provide random boosts but still limited within a certain archetype. For example, there are essences that focus on critical stats. There are essences that drastically improve your weapon attack stat, etc. Grinding for essences is part of the endgame loop. If you played Warframe, it's like grinding for Riven mods. My only wish is that grinding for essences could be made less boring because in the alpha, the only way to grind them is to go explore the overworld and bully helpless elites. The voice acting is amazing, but I don't like how the main character doesn't talk. I really wish it could be at least similar to HSR, where sometimes the main character actually talks. The current game optimization is pretty whack. I know my video card isn't the best, but an RTX 3060 shouldn't have so much FPS drops on a supposedly mobile game. I do think this will significantly improve in the future. Remember that everything I said about the game is just my experience in the technical alpha. The game is still under development, so it will definitely continue evolving. Overall, I am looking forward to the game. I have this belief that gacha games should never limit what a player could do outside of the gacha. The gacha is already some sort of wall, so I don't think it's necessary to put such things like stamina to prevent players from progressing. While Enfield does have a stamina system, you are still allowed to grind as much as you want. 99% of the game's content is not gated by stamina, which is going to be one of the strongest selling points of this game. And that's it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I will see you on the next one.